use Seta?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I will start the introductions today, but I'm going to hand over pretty quickly to Shane Conway. But I just want to thank you all for coming back to us again. This is, I suppose, for us, a new semester of our Rural Voices seminar series in Galway. And since the last time we met up with you all, we have changed the University of Galway. We're still the same people, still the same interests, but a little bit of a different name. So thanks a lot for joining us. I see some familiar faces on board, and I'm going to, because I'm actually teaching myself, so I'm going to pull out a little bit early from the session, but because of that I'm going to hand over to Shane Conway to chair for the afternoon today. So I'll hand over to Shane to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Maura. Just a quick background on this seminar series for those of you not joining us for the first time. It was established in conjunction with the Department of Rural and Community Development in January 2022, and essentially it aims to link up policy, research and practice through various presentations. And that's important because, you know, traditionally there's been a lot of the silos that have existed between those three key facets of rural studies. So hopefully this will achieve that. You know, I am delighted to introduce today's Rural Voices speaker, Dr. James Moran, Senior Lecturer in Biology and Ecology in the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment at Atlantic Technological University, Galway, formerly GMIT. And James will be providing us with an overview of the locally adapted hybrid results-based agri-environment payments approach, which has been developed as a mechanism to recognize the value of a range of ecosystem services within rural areas. And this is, you know, particularly important as, you know, we approach the new CAP programming period. So just, you know, we really are privileged to have James speak to us on this topic, because as well as leading the Agroecology and Rural Development Research Group at ATU, you know, he's also a very recognized figure in this area across Europe. He sits on the board of the European Results-Based Payments Network and is also regularly called upon by the EU Commission to highlight the importance of innovative local partnership approaches in realizing a sustainable future for rural areas. And also he's a co-founder of the Farming for Nature initiative established in 2018. I'm a judge on this as well, and I definitely recommend checking out their website to view this year's selected ambassadors and vote for your favorite one. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to James to give you a presentation. Thanks.
Right. Thanks, Shane and Maura. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully this all works smoothly now, and then we can get started. You're always worried that the technology works correctly at the start of these webinars, but we're good to go there, Shane, are we?
Yeah, good to go.
All right, perfect. Okay, so just the title today I put on this is Enabling Transition essentially to Sustainable Agriculture, and looking at the research, policy and practice interface. And what we're going to work towards is how our research and policy and practice work over the last 20 years is working towards valuing a range of ecosystem services from rural areas. So I'll first of all look at the overall context in terms of the landscape of the country, farmland diversity and the policy framework as well. And then we'll move on to looking at how we've developed these hybrid results-based payment schemes that are locally adapted to particular context, in particular how they pay for ecosystem services that are not valued in the market, such as nature, water and carbon. And we look at the development pathway over the last 20 years from pilots to wider uptake and rollout that we hope will happen now in the next CAP on the 1st of January 2023. So I hope to go through this in about 30 to 40 minutes to give you some insight into the evidence base behind this, but also some of the challenges encountered and solutions. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that this is work of a large, diverse group of people. So it's the combined work of a range of project teams and partners across the country. assisted by a network of friends and colleagues from across Europe. And over the last 20 years, collectively, we've seen many projects and programs in the agri-environment area, but substantial challenges remain for our diverse cultural landscapes, which encompass some of the most important nature areas and cultural landscapes in the whole of Europe. So some of these diverse range of projects are coming together. These are like jigsaws in a large puzzle, and in some way we have to bring all these pieces of the jigsaw together to respond to the societal challenges both today and into the future. So just first of all, to set some context on this. The scale of the challenges cannot be underestimated when it comes to trying to move towards sustainable agriculture and forestry systems in general. Globally, in agriculture, it has made significant gains in agricultural productivity in recent decades in particular. But this has come at significant social and environmental costs. And this has led to the government declaring a biodiversity and climate emergency because of our unsustainable use of natural resources across various industries and human activities. But this climate change and biodiversity crisis, they're interrelated problems that threaten the food security and sustainability of our agricultural systems. And I suppose our agricultural system is uniquely placed. It's cited as both a driver of climate change and biodiversity loss, but also one of the areas that will be most affected by these interrelated challenges. And in particular, biodiversity, nature, healthy environment, this underpins our production system. So everything from our pollination, nutrient recycling, soil structure, pest control, regulation of water supply, you name it, it's depending on nature, biodiversity, and a relatively stable climate for us to have a functioning system on which we live, you know. But the big problem is it's undervalued in our current agricultural production system and policy framework. So that's the general global context. And I think we cannot underestimate the scale of the challenges in which we operate broadly. Also, I want to state a few things about the interactions between the state of nature in Ireland and interactions with agriculture. I think sometimes we look outside our windows, walk on our farms, across our fields, and we don't see the changes that are happening in front of our eyes, you know. So a lot of our work that I'm going to be presenting and concentrates on improving the relationship between the state of nature and agriculture in an Irish context. And one of the things we have to say is at this stage, it's not in a good place in the last 2 decades. 85% of our habitats that are monitored are currently in unfavorable conservation status. And it's even worse that 46% of these are in a declining trend, not improving. Large areas of semi-natural vegetation, including areas home to many of our most threatened habitats and species, have been completely undervalued by policy, and in particular in the CAP in recent years. And this pace of change and response to policy is quite slow. We have no clear policy or land use targets for high nature value farmland. We have no integrated land use policy in general in the country, trying to basically square the circle in terms of competing demands for food, water quality, flood alleviation, response to climate, etc. Now, that said, we've had some positive moves in certain local areas. We see at a local level, people have locally adapted pilots. There's results-based payment mechanisms put in place, and we see some local successes in terms of development of payments for biodiversity and related ecosystem services. So the thing I'd just like to set this in context is the threats are identified, the solutions are identified, but the scale of implementation is way too small to address the scale of these global challenges that we face. And the big thing is now, how do we move from these pilots to a wider rollout? Right, so that's the larger context. So just to move to a situation where we're looking at the context, and one of the first things we do as a research group is look at the state of the landscape itself and state of the environment. So I just want to give a brief overview of the Irish landscape. This is some work we've done recently in combining the physiographic unit maps of the Geological Survey of Ireland and broader land cover maps from the Copernicus Earth Observation Programme using Careen land cover data. So we combined these together and classified the Irish countryside into 9 broad landscape units. So the landscapes of the country range from the intensified lowlands in green that have the potential to produce high quantities and quality of food and fiber, to extensive mountainous areas in the great brown, dark brown colors here. But there's a wide range of land types in between, characterized by differences in geology, topography, soil, climatic variation, and land cover. And these have a wide land use capacity. 75% of this land is under production landscapes of varying intensity, managed for food and fiber production. 65% farmland, mostly pasture, and 10% forest. And the basis of our policy and practice when it comes to land use must be a fundamental realization that all land cannot be all things to all people. One size does not fit all, and different land types function differently and are advantaged to provide a particular set of services to society. We also do a lot of work on trying to identify and assess ecosystem service provision from these various land types. And in Ireland, this diverse land base provides a range of ecosystem services that society depends on. And to sustain current and future generations, we need our land base to provide food, fiber, production support services such as pollination, pest control, and nutrient cycling. It needs to regulate water supplies, prevent flooding, store carbon, provide space for recreation, tourism, and contribute to human health and well-being in general. But the big problem is our economic system only values a very small proportion of these services. And as a result, we have an undersupply of what's termed non-market services or public goods. So just to focus a bit on Ireland, in terms of looking at the agricultural system in general, one of the things we've looked at quite a bit is high nature value farmlands systems, as well as our relatively intensive systems on deep fertile soils. So these are our systems. We call them high nature value. In the past, these might have been called marginal from a purely food production point of view. But we must remember that Ireland's agriculture has shaped the landscape for millennia, and much of the work of our research group has concentrated on the high nature value farmland landscapes of Ireland. So these are the parts of the country where people and nature have co-evolved over centuries to create landscapes of high natural and cultural values. They've had natural constraints on increases in food production because of topography, wet soils, underlying soil conditions. But these, as a result, still hold high amounts of semi-natural vegetation. So semi-natural vegetation is dominant in these areas. So we have our intensive production on fertile lowlands with high inputs, the white areas here, and then they vary across up as we move up in the east and move to the west. We get extensive areas of land with natural constraints and obviously have low inputs of external fertilizers and feed. And these low intensity farmland systems in green are very important in terms of biodiversity, landscape, and social cultural values, and provide a whole host of ecosystem services. Now, one of the things, the areas in white, is not to say that they don't have any nature value. They also have a nature value. They're interspersed with networks of hedgerows, ponds, small areas of semi-natural vegetation, woodland copses, small areas of scrubland as well. But the big thing is that in the areas in green, they're dominated by these semi-natural features that aren't as advantaged in terms of food or fiber production. These green areas cover a substantial part of the country. About 33% of the agricultural areas is high nature value farmland. 50% of it is part of the Natura 2000 network, so part of the EU Habitats and Birds Directive. They've been designated and recognized as some of the most important areas for biodiversity in the whole of Europe. But because of the natural constraints on food production, and also the undervaluing of these additional services from our agricultural land, the areas that are dominated by semi-natural vegetation are particularly under threat from abandonment or intensification, where they can be converted or reclaimed for more intensive food production purposes. And also, in terms of, we've done a bit of work, I'm not going to concentrate on it today, on high nature value forests, but of our forest area, only about 1% of that total area is a high nature value forest, again dominated by semi-natural forest systems. So as a research group, we work on a number of research projects over the years. And one of the things we try to do, first of all, is identify the extent of habitats, quantify their nature value of farms and the ecosystem services supplied from these areas. We devote a significant proportion of our time within our research to trying to identify appropriate measures for future agri-environmental climate schemes under the Common Agricultural Policy. And I presented the outcomes of the national mapping and characterization in previous slides. So we've characterized the landscape into 9 different types. We have our high nature value farming systems identified as well. And within this project, which is called the Farm Ecos, we're looking at farmland measures for ecological sustainability. We looked at the development of agri-environmental schemes, not just in extensive systems, but across the intensity gradients, everything from the highly productive land to the extensive areas and high nature value areas. So with these, we need to understand the potential of the wide range of land types to produce ecosystem services. So how we quantify what is the quality and how management interacts in terms of ecosystem services. And this all leads us towards ultimately trying to develop simple scoring systems on a 1 to 10 point basis, which can be used as a basis for payment to farmers for delivering services and developing actions or recommendations to enhance the overall quality of our agricultural landscapes to meet a range of societal needs. So this is just an example here. So within this project, we selected 2 catchments, one in the southeast of the country and one in the northwest of the country, with a land use intensity and gradient within a relatively short distance of 20 to 30 kilometers. So these are specific catchments that we've mapped. So we had intensive mapping of the ecosystems or land cover habitats in these areas, and then we modeled the ecosystem service supply in each of these areas. So there was a lot of intensive work in terms of vegetation surveys, invertebrates surveys as well, and also our partners in DCU done soil surveys within these areas. But everything started first of all with intensive field level mapping of the areas across the land use intensities. In the slide here, you'll just see we've just an example. As we move from the north to the south in the map, we move from essentially from intensive beef and dairy farming systems right through to the extensive areas as we move towards the brown, where we're moving into uplands through semi-natural grasslands into peatlands and heathlands. So you can see here the farms that are high nature value farmland, they're dominated by peatland habitats, semi-natural grasslands with some small pockets of improved agricultural grasslands in the light green. But the intensive farms are dominated by improved agricultural grasslands, but they also have within them networks of hedgerows, field boundaries, small pockets of woodlands within that. So I just want to highlight, first of all, in these maps, as we're essentially moving from the north to the south, we're moving from highly productive, some of the best soils in the country on deep brown earths, pastoral systems, to extensive pastoral system and more challenging from a food production point of view, but very important from a biodiversity point of view. So we then modeled the lead researcher on this modeling work was Sarah Ruiz, and we've done a range of ecosystem services were mapped, including the habitat quality, pollination services, carbon storage, and food and fiber production. So this slide shows the examples of the different model outputs. The best thing to look at here is as you move from the pink to the blue, you see higher quantities of the particular ecosystem service. So if you see in the top left-hand side there, you'll see the habitat quality. So the pink areas are the areas that are dominated by improved agricultural grasslands, very important for food and fiber, but maybe lower in terms of their overall habitat quality and amount of biodiversity that they hold and species that they support. The carbon storage model, again, as we move from the yellows through to the greens, through to the blues, we have no pink areas that are very, very low, but as we move from yellows to green to blues, we move from low carbon storage to very high carbon storage in the peatland areas. The pollination model is more diverse. There's a range of pollinating species that have different habitat requirements. Some of these favor the ecological networks through the lowland areas, so they're associated with that, and some of them are less distributed in the uplands as well. So more of a mixed picture, more complex picture when it comes to pollinating services. But the production model is basically nearly the inverse to the carbon and habitat quality model. So again, as you're moving into the blues, you're moving into quite highly productive areas. And we've modeled this on a potential euro per hectare generated. So you're moving from areas in the pink to potentially income generated from food production of 60, 70 euro per hectare to multiples of 10 higher than that, to 600 to 700 euro per hectare in the blue areas. And this basically highlights to us that the high nature value farms that are dominated by semi-natural vegetation have very different services compared to the intensive managed areas. Now, this is not to say one is better than the other, but the one thing I want to highlight is that we need them all. We need the food production, we need the carbon storage, we need the pollination services, we need the habitat quality to address our biodiversity crisis. So looking at the 4 ecosystem services, we see contrasting pictures between the various services. There are clear trade-offs between food production, some of the other ecosystem services that I'll describe in the next slide. So you'll see here, so looking at this in more detail, we see that there are clear synergies, but also trade-offs. And to me, this clearly illustrates that it will, if we want all services, which we do to sustain human populations, then we have to have clear targeting of land use, cognizant of these trade-offs and synergies, essentially matching the land use targets to the capacity of the land. So, just to summarize, the high quality habitats correlates positively with carbon storage and pollinator abundance. The main habitats that display these joint attributes of supporting biodiversity, high nature value, carbon storage, and pollination are the semi-natural grasslands ranked 1, followed by the non-production woodlands, so where you're not taking off wood products out, heathland and peatland, then the hedgerows and tree lines, and then some of the more commercial forest plantations come in next. These then we have the areas that are very important for food and fiber production. So we have improved grassland and tillage areas. This seems a bit obvious, but our commercial forest plantations. So the more we take for our own food and fiber production, the less there for pollination and less is left to go back into carbon storage, for example. This comes into this concept of human appropriated net primary production. The more we appropriate for ourselves as a species, there's less is left for biodiversity than other ecosystem services. And it's just that general principle that's coming across here. Now, one thing I want to emphasize, we're not here saying anything is good or bad. Remember, it's just that there are different rankings based on different services. Also, other work within the Farm Ecos project has highlighted that some of the most important habitats for biodiversity, water regulation, carbon storage, they're undervalued in our agricultural policy, but obviously undervalued in our markets as well. So these take up a large proportion of extensive farms where there is ongoing risks of abandonment. So obviously, if they're not valued in our policy support payments in CAP, and they're not valued in our market, then it's very difficult on farms which are dominated by these undervalued or ignored ecosystems to make a living. So this is just basically maps of the proportional areas of the different areas of habitat per farm in one of our catchments. And as you can see, really, as you move from the intensive areas to the extensive areas, you get a larger proportion of habitats that are essentially undervalued in our agricultural policy. And undervalued here means simply not obliged to retain, generally no support in agri-environmental climate measures, apart from maybe some within commonage areas. But the valued ones, they're currently protected as landscape features, they're eligible for BPS, and farmers are obliged to retain them under the common agricultural policy. So some of this research goes some way to explain why we've got into the situation that we're in at the moment in terms of a biodiversity crisis, in terms of the undervaluing of certain habitats that are important for nature, important for carbon storage within our systems. So this is where we come to our results-based payment scheme. So Much of the research and pilot project work that we have been involved with has focused on, in terms of transforming this research into policy and practice, we focused on developing and testing results-based payment scheme, essentially developing a market for these undervalued ecosystem services. So we're taking lessons from pilot projects such as the Burn Life program and trying to apply them elsewhere. So what are results-based payment systems? In simple terms, these are agri-environmental schemes where payments are linked directly to the delivery of results rather than a set of actions or prescriptions expected to deliver the result. So within the systems we developed, each field is typically scored out of 10 using a scorecard in the Irish model. And essentially, the higher the nature quality, the higher the payment. And in many cases, the emerging system is a combination of results-based payments and supporting actions to support farmers to get their basic infrastructure, habitats in better condition up to the level at which they can expect to get higher payments from this pseudo market. In Ireland today, we've also focused our results-based payment projects, these pilot programs, on biodiversity and associated ecosystem services. So it's basically that habitat quality, water, soil, and pollination services. We've seen over the years, the system has evolved into the development of a field scoring systems that measures the condition of ecosystems and their delivery of a range of services. There's this emerging general scorecard structure, which is essentially a multi-criteria assessment of ecological condition for delivery of these bundles of ecosystem services. So essentially what we're trying to do is measure a field based on a number of criteria that correlate with habitat quality, that correlate with carbon storage, but that are easy to measure by a farmer and an advisor in the field. So we usually use a suite of easily identifiable plant indicator species, both positive and negative indicators, simple indicators of soil quality or integrity, such as percentage bare ground, evidence of erosion. And then in terms of the hydrological quality or integrity of the field or the parcels that are being investigated, we look at how near natural the hydrological system is, the water features, the drainage systems, or whether they're highly modified or not. And then we also take into account within these damaging activities, if there's anything evident in the field in terms of burning, feed site damage, dumping, evidence of inappropriate herbicide or pesticide use. And then there's a score or a weighting for each of these various variables, and essentially you get a 10-point score for each field. And then the payment systems are linked to the 1 to 10 score. At the moment, we have developed general scorecard systems for grasslands, peatlands, woodlands, and field boundaries. And also, the important thing with this is they're an important communication tool as well as a scoring system. So we have to be able to take the complexity of the science that I've been showing you maybe in the first this broad scale mapping, the detailed understanding of ecosystem services, all this invertebrate plant monitoring, understanding how soil condition and water quality interacts with agriculture, and trying to bring these down into a couple of simple variables that can be measured by the farmer, but also within each variable they can see where maybe their score is going down, and they can get guidance or advice on how to improve their score as well, that I'll explain in the next couple of slides. But the important thing for these indicators or variables that we use within the scoring system is that they need to reflect the variation in the condition of the targets, whether it be water, general biodiversity, particular species, and they need to occur consistently across the target area. They need to respond to agricultural management and be within the control of the farmer. There's no point in putting in things there that are subject to the vagaries of weather or change that is outside the control of the farmer. They must also be easily understood by the farmers, the advisors, and the paying agency after some minimal training. And what we try to come up with in the scoring system is an optimum combination of weighting of these variables or results indicators so that they reflect the importance to the target, they minimize complexity, they provide a robust measure of quality, but also they provide an early warning system and clear signals to the farmer on success of their current management. So overall, in terms of these results-based payment systems in an Irish context. 3 broad hybrid models have evolved, and I'll explain a bit more detail in the coming slides. So these combine results-based payments with traditional supporting actions, but often we have in some of the schemes bonus payments built in for particular high-level targets that we want the farmers to focus on. The simplest one we have there is number 1. That's a simple hybrid system. We have our 10-point scoring system for habitat quality for semi-natural grasslands, woodlands, peatlands, and field boundaries. And then farmers get scored on a score of 1 to 10. If they're scoring 7, 8s, 9s, and 10s, they're in good to excellent condition. They're getting very well rewarded, getting good payments for that. But sometimes when the actual scores are quite low, maybe it's around 2s, 3s, and 4s, and there's quite an amount of intensive maybe capital works to restore the green architecture on a farm, then the farmers are giving supporting action payments to cover the costs of bringing that up to a payable score, and then the scoring systems take over after that again. So that has worked quite well simply for grassland, woodland, and peatland targets in terms of the habitats. In some instances, like in the hen harrier program, we have a high quality species living within the landscape that's in danger of extinction. The hen harrier, it roams over a large area, so it'd be unfair to actually basically tie any individual farmer's payment to the success or not of the breeding of a hen harrier, where there's multiple other factors, other land uses, climate variation coming into place as well. But we do still want them to focus that the hen harrier is still a target within their area. So within that, we have system 1, this is number 3 here, but we add in a bonus payment. So there's monitoring of the hen harrier species itself. And if within a particular landscape area, the hen harrier meets its breeding targets in terms of fledging of young, then all the farmers within that area, they've got high scores and good quality, maybe fields and scores of 6 or greater, share in a 10% bonus or a dividend. And this ties some of the payment and maybe brings a bit more attention to the hen harrier as a valuable asset within the landscape. Number 2 there on the top right is we have the habitat quality. We're trying to improve the habitat quality in general across the farms and across catchments. But within this one, we also want to improve water quality. So within water quality, the problem is with water quality is that you can have everything pristine in 90% of a catchment. You can have one area along by where you get a poor farmyard or a riparian zone that's destroyed, or drainage works going directly and sediment going directly into river in a very small area of the catchment, and it can cause big problems. Okay, so within that area we have a whole farm adjustment that tries to identify a broad suite of actions across the whole farm, and if farmers are having trouble in individual areas, they might get a score of 0.6. So that 0.6 multiplier is multiplied by their results-based payment. So essentially it's seen as a penalty initially, but what we do is give supporting actions for that money that's taken off to try and improve the situation. Generally, that 0.6 weighting can be improved within a year. So the farmer goes to 1, they're not losing anything. But if a farm is in excellent condition, they have excellent riparian buffer zones, you know, they're providing additional services in terms of flood alleviation or wetlands on their farm. There's a 0.2 multiplier in the pearl mussel project, for example. So you get a 20% bonus where you're delivering additional water services. So this is one of the things I want to emphasize here. Depending on whether you're dealing with just ecosystems themselves and nature and soil quality, you can go with a simple habitat quality and supporting actions. Where you want to bring in a landscape target such as a hen harrier species, you look in with this bonus or landscape bonus structure. But then if you're trying to bring in water quality and try and improve the lot across a whole farm, a whole catchment situation, then you have to bring in some whole farm adjustments or floodplain payments within that situation as well. So there's over the last 5 to 10 years in Ireland in particular, we've developed quite nuanced approaches for different targets. Still the same basic science, the same basic scoring systems, but how you apply them, how you design the incentive can make a big difference. So this is just the hen harrier bonus in a bit more detail. We have our results-based payment for habitat quality. So the target is biodiversity, water, and soil targets. We target the supporting actions and infrastructure and feature creation for supporting action to improve the environmental quality of the farm. The landscape level bonus pays for the bird population targets, and all these are added together to give the final payment to the farmer. For the water quality, as I've explained in the previous slide, we have the habitat quality and a flood payment to reward flood storage and to allow for the flooding on particular land where it's already subject to flooding along by rivers. If land is flooded and is regularly flooded for decades, this is one of the first times that the farmer will get rewarded for this, and it'll be seen as a positive in terms of flood storage rather than a negative. But also trying to incentivize improvements of water quality and the quantity of these wetland features within the landscape with a whole farm assessment as well. The whole farm assessment takes into account essentially the farmyard risk assessment, the farm nutrient balance indicators, level of damage to watercourses such as bank erosion, risk of nutrient or sediment loss, and flows, whether they're nearly naturalized or recently cleared or created drainage systems on the farm. So just to illustrate, this is from the Pearl Mussel project. It's an example of the overall structure. So say when a farmer first goes in, we know a lot of areas in the country, some farms are in relatively good condition at the moment. There are quite a number of farms that are in excellent condition, but there are just a small number that are in poor condition as well. So we have this variation in quality across the country. So for this first time, you could have a situation where many parts of the farm are in excellent ecological condition. The farmers are getting 10 out of 10 in some of the peatland areas there, 6 out of 10 in other ones. There's 10 out of 10 grasslands, and then there's 2 out of 10 and some areas that are getting 0 out of 10. But the ones that have 0 out of 10 there, you can see the problems there from A to E. The silt from poached ground reaching the river through the drainage channel there. There's open drains directly reaching the drainage channels. There's patches of heavy grazing. There's some non-native invasive species such as rhododendron, and there's cattle in the river. So first of all, the farmer on this top one would probably be getting a whole farm multiplier of 0.6, but they need some of the work that's there is quite capital intensive. So they would be getting in this first year, they'll put in a program of measures in place to alleviate some of these problems. So they'll put plugs in the drains to slow the runoff, so catching the sediment, but still maintaining the flow and the drainage of the surrounding land. They'll put in cattle drinking troughs in the area and water infrastructure, so the animals don't have to be going directly to the river. They'll fence off some of the riparian zone to allow that to recover where there was some of the feeding damage there at the moment. They'll work on rhododendron removal problems, which is a long-term issue and can take a number of decades to remove, but they'll start working on that as well. That second farm would definitely have a score of 1 or 1.2 in their whole farm multiplier, but you'll also see that the scores on individual fields are also going up, indicating that it's of higher nature value, it's of higher in terms of soil integrity, and also in terms of the overall contributions to water quality within that area. So that gives you a picture over time, and that after a 5-year, 6-year, 7-year, 8-year, 9-year, 10-year program, that farm will continue to improve. It'll still be producing high quality food production, but also producing a range of high quality ecosystem services. So still, some of these fields will still remain, the farmer will probably choose to leave this as a 4 out of 10, and this field here is a 3 out of 10. They're the silage fields. They're the areas that are needed for supporting the food production on the farm. So it's not, there's 0 or 4 out of 10 from the point of view of nature, water, and soils. But some of these might be 10 out of 10 in the case of the food production, in terms of their key areas for supporting fodder production on the farm in terms of silage or hay fields, for example. So remember, these scores are just for the non-market ecosystem services, and there are other scores that farmers know well, in terms of farmers walk into a field and they know the productive capacity, whether it's going to be 5,000 or 6,000 kg of dry matter per hectare, or up or 10 to 15,000 in terms of the most important fields that they will have for grass production in the country. So that's one of the things we want to emphasize here, is that these scores out of 10 are for particular services, not for the food and fiber provisioning services. Also, we've done a lot of work internationally on these results-based payments, and a lot of what we've learned has been working from colleagues and how they apply it in different areas, from Eastern Europe, in Romania and Transylvania, through colleagues working in Sweden, the Montados and the Heses in Spain and Portugal in agroforestry systems, and we've worked closely with colleagues over the last couple of years as well in England, Scotland and Wales, and we've had a number of cross visits where farmers and groups of policymakers have gone over to their countries. They've come here. We've been sharing ideas, particularly with the people in terms of the context of Brexit. They're outside the confines of CAP, and seeing how they're going in terms of their environment land management systems, that I was quite optimistic about until I saw their mini budget last week, but that's a different story. But one of the things we must emphasize with these results-based payment systems, the socio-cultural context is very important. So these are essentially the Rolls Royce of agri-environmental schemes. A lot of whether they can be implemented at scale depends on the interactions with government and private institutions already. Have you got good education advisory services set up? Have you got the capacity and knowledge within the farming sector to easily pick up these scoring systems? Now, I think we do, because a lot of farmers are already scoring their food products. They have the Europe system for the grading of their cattle. Many farmers can walk into a field and grade the animals in the field from EU or ROP, and they will know the quality of them. They're just looking at variables on the cattle in terms of the fleshing over the hips, over the tailbone, over the ribs. So they have particular indicators that they look at. These results-based payment systems are the same thing. Farmers should be able to walk into fields and say, right, I know that field is a 4, I know that field is a 7, I know that field is excellent quality. And for that point of view, when we've worked with farmers in these pictures here, from Navarra in northern Spain to wet grasslands in Leitrim to flooded meadows and the Shannon Callows, to areas of the hen harrier and the pearl mussel, farmers, this is quotes directly from farmers, they generally feel that a well-designed and locally adapted and flexible agri-environmental scheme improves their engagement in the delivery of the measure. They like the principle that farmers producing a high quality environmental product are rewarded with higher payments. And they felt that the schemes like this can make them more conscious about positive environmental management in general. And it's basically, they're seeing themselves and their worth and belief in what they do in terms of producing and meeting the needs of society in terms of these additional ecosystem services and getting well rewarded from them. At this stage, there's a wide range of resources developed from these various programs, from different types of scoring systems to, we have a range of partner organizations in the results-based payment network, and we have a lot of that information collated on the results-based payments network.eu website for a range of examples of schemes all the way across from northern Scandinavia with Sami tribes in near the Arctic Circle, right down to areas in Southern Europe and agroforestry systems, to areas outside the EU such as Switzerland, and there's some examples there from increasing interest in Canada and America also. What we see with all of these systems is that we need strategic use of a range of funding instruments to test and trial them. So LIFE funding, European innovation partnerships. A common design approach is possible across diverse agricultural landscapes, but time and expertise is required to gather the evidence base to account for variations in environmental conditions outside the farmer's control, careful selection of the variables, and ensuring that they're locally adapted, practical, and results focused. We see the best ones often have an integrated farm advisory system where there's peer-to-peer learning among farmers, technical and specialist support, and use of online technology to improve the delivery and efficiencies of these programs. And the analogy of a car here strikes, it might be quite complex under the hood, but ultimately for the farmers and the paying agencies that will be administered this, it should be simple to drive. Also, these are more than just schemes. They're designed to appeal to farmers on a number of levels. In all of our work, you know, our heads have to be in it. We have to understand what's wanted from us, you know. So our hearts have to be in it. We have to feel pride in what we're doing, what we're producing, and recognized as better farmers as a result of this. And also, we design these programs that they have to actually put money in the farmer's pocket and contribute to a viable farm business in terms of this environmental service provision. One thing I want to, we have all this research and this practice projects, you know, but in terms of policy has to change to create the enabling policy environment for all these to happen. I think it'd be wrong of me not to mention the role of the Heritage Council over the last number of years and their support of high nature value farmland together with the European Forum for Nature Conservation and Pastoralism that I'm a member of. So pilot projects come and go, but the Heritage Council have give continued support to the development of these policies and improvements in the Common Agricultural Policy over 20 years, with raising awareness, networking and capacity building. The photograph I showed there is just some advisors that we've brought on a study tour to Scotland to look at common land management in 2011. In that picture, I know their backs are turned now, but you'll emerge from that picture are most of the EIP managers over the last number of years, and people that are now working in the policy environment, Department of Agriculture officials that are high up now are also within that picture as well, you know. And as this capacity is built and as these people go into their new roles, this was what leads to policy change. We've also focused a lot, particularly in the last 2020 and 2021, we've coordinated. We have a Farm for Nature technical group that brought together the managers of the various EIPs that the Heritage Council have been working with in the past, and I chaired that group, and we came up with recommendations for the Common Agricultural Policy for these to be extended out and scaled up. One of the things I want to just say at the moment is, when we looked at this initially, we might think this is just a matter of upscaling what happened in the burn. You could increase the size of the component or system and it could get better and bigger and just improve on the existing model. We soon found from the pilots that we couldn't just upscale, we had to outscale. So we had to add more discrete components, essentially replicating the overall framework and other discrete geographical areas, but they were locally adapted. So you got a range of basically programs within a common framework that responded to a wide range of diverse biophysical characteristics. So within the burn, where it started back in 2004, it has progressively upscaled through the burn program and through over the last number of years to now that the proposals post 2023 will be that will be rolled out to all farmers across that region. But in terms of outscaling, we tried to basically develop this over a wide range of biophysical characteristics. So when back in 2013, we would have liked to have seen the burn model rolled out more widely, but it was considered that there was neither the capacity or the evidence base to enable this at the time. So a different approach to scaling had to be pursued. This involved trialing and testing the burn model, essentially outscaling the principles and framework in a broad range of landscape contexts. So we tested this using the RBPS program across Spain, the UK. There was partner projects in Romania. We had Interreg projects working north-south. We had EU live programs. We had Horizon 2020 thematic networks. By God, we were going to build capacity. We thought in the next 7 years, or we were going to die trying, you know. So essentially, this was very important. It led to, in 2021 to 2023, the government were at a stage that they had a national pilot, the REAP pilot, to actually test the administrative capacity of this to see could it be scaled. And now we're at a stage where it's going to be rolled out to 20,000 farmers across the country. Now, not without its challenges, there's still some skin and hair flying in terms of how this should be done in the final number of weeks before this is open to farmers. But essentially what has happened is that these programs have been the stepping stones to outscaling. So we've had the results-based payments programs that were initially funded by the European Commission. We've had the 23 Irish EIP agri projects, initially 10 of them involved testing results-based payment schemes in various diverse landscapes. So the research and innovation has led to local adaptation. We've incorporated multiple targets like I've shown, and particularly the larger EIPs, such as the hen harrower projects, have been able to test this at scale and brought in administrative efficiencies and developed technologies such as mobile applications as well. So one of the things with this is we've had to basically create and seize opportunities over the last 20 years. It could appear when you look at this, you know, I could have presented this was a systematic approach, wasn't it great, where we have co-creation of solution, integration of research, co-design, yada, 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 all the buzzwords, you know, but that would be overselling and impossible. What we've seen was a more organic and reactive process, which is the reality of the political environment in which we're working. We had to, as researchers and practitioners on the ground, get down and dirty with the policy and actively engage in the policy work, be involved in civil dialogue groups in Brussels, actively advocate for the change in the regulations that would facilitate the upscaling of this. There was some basic problems with the articles in the regulations that needed to facilitate a cooperative approach, giving more flexibility at local level and also allowing for results-based payments. We even advocated strongly when we knew things weren't going as well as we would have liked and roll out for the EIP Agri approach to facilitate the testing of scaling of this in 2011 to 2013. So I can't underestimate either. Knowledge co-creation, sharing and networking were very important. This was key to securing the uptake and successful scaling. Hugely important here was trust and capacity building. And this had to be built on sound scientific evidence base combined with local knowledge. The local knowledge, the science on its own without knowing how it can practically implement it was useless. But it was very important to transparency across all this progress. We had to actually share all the information we had even before it's published in scientific journals, in reports, in presentations, with the commission, with politicians, with policymakers, with people on the ground. And all of this came to basically build capacity in preparation for outscaling. In all of these innovations, the roles of innovation brokers and community champions have been key. So we found that successful innovation brokerage approach is not dependent on an individual broker, but a team. Local cooperation projects, partnerships, and teams acted as a hub for innovation. And in this case, innovation brokers were not neutral actors, but took a deliberate strategic approach and were actively committed to particular goals. And the partnership fostered local champions. These were people involved in community engagement. They were involved in the co-decision and co-design of actions and communications at all government levels. So we had community champions in farm organizations, individual farmers. We had them in government departments, local authority, the Heritage Council, and these champions were key to the outscaling. When the actual proposals went up the line, there was politicians that knew what was happening. There was MEPs that knew what happened. There was EU officials that knew what was happening. There was people in the European Court of Auditors that knew what was going on with these programs. But this was all paved through partnership, communication, and this multi-actor approach that was embedded. We took a very strategic approach in 2020, forming the Farming for Nature Technical Group. We went through the actual regulations in detail. We translated all this into the language of the Common Agricultural Policy. We proposed a three-tier approach to the actual green architecture of the CAP that incorporated results-based payments across the way. We won't go into that in detail, but just to show you that this was the resultant CAP green architecture that Ireland has at the moment, approximately 10 billion, it's actually 9.8, but approximately 10 billion euro. We have enhanced baseline conditionality for the basic income for sustainability support. We have 25% of Pillar 1 payments are going to eco schemes. But the main thing that we focused on was this two-stream approach to the agri-environmental scheme. We have the general approach and the cooperation approach. This cooperation approach here in the dark green, where we've got the highest level of agri-environmental ambition, is where this locally adapted results-based approach sits. So this is where we're at now at the moment. This is what's to be rolled out in terms of these locally adapted hybrid approach in 2023 on the 1st of January. So these dark green areas are 8 different cooperation project areas. These will have local area plans, essentially diagnosing what are the main environmental priorities in these areas, understanding what are the current state of these, putting an action plan in place, a measures framework that incorporates results-based payments, supporting actions, and also landscape payments into this. There'll be specialist cooperation project teams supporting the delivery of this on the ground. They'll be designed, learning the lessons from the European Innovation Partnerships. They will invest in supporting action and landscape actions. And this is potentially a big breakthrough in rewarding delivery for nature, carbon, and water services from our land base. It's realizing this locally adapted approach. Now, it's not without its challenges. The big thing here, I think, and what's going to really make or break this over the next number of months is whether we have the capacity within our administrative and advisory system to scale to such a level. But I think the cooperation project teams have a big task and actually to make this happen on the ground. We cannot keep waiting and waiting. This is a bit of a chicken and egg situation. We have to go for this now. We've been suffering from a disease called pilotitis. We can keep doing pilots and pilots and pilots while the world burns. You know, it's like trying to put out the fires in Rome with a bucket, where we know there's a fire hose around the corner, but we're just not willing to grab it in case it's not too much for us to handle. We have to go for this now, and I hope it will work. One of the things that we've worked on as well in terms of this, we haven't just worked on results-based payment schemes. There is results-based payment schemes and agri-environment schemes don't work on their own, and the cap alone won't make viable systems, sustainable farming systems across the country. We need much more. Within the High Nature Value Pharma and Link EU thematic network project, we conducted innovation assessments of some of the 10 key high nature value farmland areas across Europe. And we found with this, when we looked at innovation in terms of social, institutional innovation, regulation and policy, products and markets, and farming techniques, even across some of the burn area, which is seen as one of the most leading lights in Europe, we fall badly down in some areas. We're not capitalizing in the markets in terms of unique products that are selling this for the pristine environment that it is, both from a tourism and a local product development. Some of the farming techniques that are being promoted aren't specifically adapted to these landscapes. We still need to improve the enabling policy environment. And we've done well in the burn in terms of social and institutional infrastructure, in terms of cooperation and multi-actor approach, but this also needs to improve over time. So this is one thing we need to do. We need an awful lot more work in this area in terms of a wide range of innovations in this area. But we are moving towards a new place, and we are shaping a new narrative around the interaction between farming and nature in Ireland. The Burn programme and various EIPs that have followed have seen the emergence of innovative partnerships working together to realise these locally adapted and results-orientated solutions. Together with the Farming for Nature that Shane mentioned at the start, we seek to celebrate the important role that farmers can build, you know, seeing this as a better way to farm. And this highlights that basically farming with nature, producing these range of ecosystem services, including food and fibre production, can be socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable. So the key things, just to finish up, we needed to understand the wider policy context in our work. We realized that system change was required, but we decided to work within the system. We wanted evolution rather than revolution. We couldn't break down and lead to system collapse. We had to bring stakeholders with us. Now, the evolution has to happen a lot quicker given the pace of the challenge, but that's another topic. Capacity and trust building were essential, and solutions could be developed but needed to be locally adapted through the empowerment and knowledge sharing across rural communities through partnership. We also need to promote and raise awareness among society at large to create, so there is recognition of these areas and the services they provide. And the last thing I just want to emphasize, and a lot of this work is summarized in a paper that we've recently published, results-based payments do not work in isolation. That's where we are. It's where I would hope we'd be in the next 7 years, but I seriously doubt. I think we're on for a continuous struggle in this interface between research, policy, and practice.
Thanks a million, James. Very comprehensive and thought-provoking presentation. 25 years of work in that area synopsized into 45 minutes, so it was very impressive. I think that the amount of the mapping at the start really showcased the challenges of the one-size-fits-all approach. So yeah, excellent. You know, we don't really have much time for questions, but if you do have questions, just email them on to us and we can send them on to James perhaps. And unless there's anything really pending that anyone wants to say very quickly, we are almost out of time. yeah, I suppose the one thing I would take from it is that the more locally led approaches, the projects, they're bringing about a behavioural and attitudinal change within the farming community towards, the provision of ecosystem services. Because for so long, farmers have been pushed, I suppose, towards being a food producer, and that's the identity they held. But thankfully, through these projects, they're starting to realize that they are also ecosystem producers. So that's, as James mentioned, the socio-cultural side of it is huge. And I think from the rural studies perspective, that's would be our focus. So just really great to hear this. And especially, it's very timely as we approach the new CAP. Exciting times, challenging but exciting. So
I think the big thing is, Shane, there, what I'm realizing over the last with our Farm for Nature Technical Group and the close interactions we have with policy design over the last 2 years in particular, is that we have major challenges in terms of facilitating this locally adapted approach within our national administrative framework. And I think it's a thing we need to concentrate on, maybe in rural studies and social sciences and government administration in general, is how can we improve technology, change our administrative systems that they're more locally responsive. It's not a decentralization, but it's how we can basically facilitate local implementation within national and international frameworks. I think it's all what I've said is very good in theory, but it does bring for government departments operational challenges. And I think I've heard the words operational feasibility, and to be cognizant of that over the last 18 to 24 months more than I've liked to hear. But I do recognize that there are challenges there, but we need to work on that side of things as well, which I would not be anyways an expert in. But I think this is something we'll need in terms of moving towards integrated land use strategies and trying to combat these challenges. We know we can do it at local level, but how can we facilitate that local implementation within our national political system?
Okay, thanks so much. That's great. And the comments coming through, thanks everyone. Really positive feedback. So again, thanks a million, James. And next month we'll be holding it the last Wednesday of the month, again at 3 p.m. So I hope for you to join us then again. And yeah, that's it. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks.
And if anyone has any questions, feel free to email me. My email is just james.mourn@atu.ie, because I know there's a few questions in the chat, but just email them on to me and I'll get back to you.
Okay. Thank you, James.
Great.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, James. It's super.
Wonderful. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.